Good evening. If everybody would find a seat, we're going to get started. For those who are signing in online, we welcome you to this evening of poetry too. And for those of you who are here, we're delighted that you're here in our church sanctuary. This is the church, if you don't know us, this is the church that Lonnie and I attend. And we are delighted to have two other poets to share this evening of poetry with you. And I think you're going to hear some really interesting writings from these three in different kinds of styles. And so I wanted to start out just so that we kind of, if you haven't been at poetry readings before, so that maybe you have a couple of things to think about as you're listening to them. So I prepared a couple of questions that I said that we were going to start out by my just kind of sending the mic along here so they can, in some sense, kind of introduce themselves a little bit, or at least some things about their poetry. So we're going to start that way this evening. The three that are here is Alarie Tennille and Dwight Bitikofer and then Lonnie Buerge. And so I will kind of ask a question and we'll just send the mic down, and then we'll kind of go to another question before we head into all of the readings. So my first question is actually a two-part question. When did you start writing poetry, and why poetry and not just a story or a novel?
I started writing poetry in second or third grade, probably third grade, but I was actually writing short stories before that, and novels were just out of the question at that time. I didn't think I'd ever be a poet, but my mother taught me to scan poetry because she thought it was fun. She read to me a lot, and I'm from a family of avid readers, so I read a lot of stuff other than poetry too. And it was later in life that I actually officially became a poet, because I didn't think, poets for me were up on a pedestal above novelists. And it wasn't until I went to about 12 workshops with well-known poets, ones, if you follow poetry, Ted Kooser, Jane Hirschfield, people like that who are quite well-known. And they finally convinced me I was a poet. So I started publishing just in about 2005, but I was a writer and an editor by livelihood, so it was not totally new. So I thought I would be a novelist one day, and then my attention span got too short, and I just write short things. So.
I'm Dwight Bitikofer, and I guess I first started writing poetry in 7th grade. My 7th grade teacher in the small country grade school let me read some poems that she had written, and I thought, I didn't think I was interested in poetry, but maybe this is something I can do. So off and on over the years, I have written poetry, and I got a lot more involved with poetry starting about 20 years ago. Got involved in I live in St. Louis, and the St. Louis poetry community I got involved with. I started going to a lot of open mics and was really involved in open mic circles for a while, and curated one or two poetry readings events that were monthly events that I emceed or curated, several of those events. Why poetry? I mean, I guess maybe it matches the length of my attention span better than longer writing. But I've also, my career was in journalism, and so I did, I wrote newspaper stories, feature stories, and for 20 years or so had a newspaper column, and so I did that kind of writing. So.
Compared to these two, I started late in life. A senior in high school, I was a senior in high school, I had an English teacher who convinced me that I could write and that I could actually read it and enjoy it. And then I kind of ignored it because I didn't have a concept that you would actually write. And so it's been 10 years now that I've been trying to write intentionally and keep track of what I'm doing. And yes, my attention span is way too short to think about anything longer than a poem.
Okay, next question. How do you start writing a poem?
There are infinite possibilities. What the poems I'm going to read to you today are all ekphrastic poems, which means they were written inspired by artwork. And Homer, the poet Homer, was the first to do ekphrastic writing when he wrote describing was Achilles' shield. And my husband's nodding, he was an English teacher. So that's why we have such a difficult word as ekphrastic to describe it, because it's from the Greek. So I forgot what the question was now. Oh, just all right. So now, well, my poem started off being about family, because I was wanting to write memoirs, and they came out in poetry form. And after a while, I felt like I'd exposed most of the things I wanted to say and hidden the others away. So I said, well, I've got to find something else to write about. But a lot of time it's just quirky things of the moment, or a concert I go to, something I see. One night I wrote a poem called My Drinking Buddy, about having a fruit fly in my glass of wine, you know. And so they can come from anywhere at any time, usually inconvenient times when you can't sit down and write, so I keep repeating in my head until I get there.
I guess usually a poem will begin for me with just a line will come to mind, and then I will let that develop into, see what follows that and let it develop into a poem. I have done a number of poetry workshops, and sometimes those have been topical, or to inspire something. Twice, I have a poet acquaintance in St. Louis who has written a poem a day for, I think she's on 4,000 and some days now, or something like that. But I have done that for maybe 100 days in a row a couple of times, and that was a generative process for me. A lot of those were throwaways, but there were a few good poems that came out of that too. Just forcing myself to create something, and it's a good discipline, and I haven't done that for a few years, but that would be a good thing to maybe try again.
I do attend the workshops online, and the prompts helped me a lot. There are many times when I think I haven't written anything for a couple of days, and I'll just sit down in front of a page and start with the first word that comes to my mind. And if I keep at it, sometimes something good happens. Not every time.
Okay, next question. Do you write poems in meter or in free verse? Often, especially as we're growing up, we usually think of poems that kind of rhyme at the end of every other line, or every third, fourth line, whatever it is. So do you write in meter or do you write in free verse?
Yes. I was a Hallmark writer, and so I wrote a lot in verse, and I can say myself I'm pretty good at that, but I don't choose it for my personal writing very often. I prefer free verse, but occasionally, if I'm writing about something that I have to do research about, like messenger pigeons is the example that comes to mind, I start sounding like I'm writing for the National Geographic, and there's nothing poetic in the verse. So then I said, okay, you're going to turn this into a sonnet, and it's going to be the messenger pigeon himself talking, and then you're going to be fine. So that's what happened, but I try not to do that too often, because sonnets are really hard.
Free verse. Yeah, I have never really developed a skill for doing a lot of the forms. I've written a few pantoums, but that's about all I've done in form. I write for the sound. I think poetry is meant to be experienced out loud, and so I mean, I kind of write for sound.
I definitely write in free verse because I'm too undisciplined to write in any real form. I rely on the sound of the rhythm and the sound of the words to my own ear. So I read everything out loud that I've written to try to see if I agree with it, the rhythm is right.
Well, and then that leads to our last question. Do you prefer writing poetry or reading your poetry?
Actually, now I like both. When I started out, I was shy my whole life through school. Part of it, I think, is that I couldn't see, and that made me more timid. But really afraid to talk at a microphone and go up on stage, and now I'm the one raising my hand and running forward. But it took me 4 years. When I started publishing my poems, I realized no one is going to know who you are, no one's going to read your poems unless you get out in the public and do these readings. So I conscientiously researched how to overcome stage fright, and it took me about 4 years, and now I enjoy doing that. It's such a different thing because I don't read poems in public that I don't have some confidence in. So I think that's part of why I might prefer that a little more to the writing, but the writing is always, questionable whether you're going to be happy at the end or not. So, yeah, it's whatever.
Yeah, I definitely enjoy reading poems more than writing. Like I said, I got involved in open mic circuits back around the early 2000s, and I found that I really enjoyed this three-dimensional aspect of my words, the sound, and reading the reactions on people's faces. So definitely reading is what I enjoy more than the writing.
I enjoy reading. I write to communicate. I don't write just to express something. I really want to communicate something, and to me, there has to be ears to hear that, and hopefully I achieve that sometimes.
All right, thank you. We're going to let them sit down for just a minute, and I'm going to, so we'll have you take seats for just a minute. A couple of little housekeeping things while you are here. Just a reminder about clapping. One of the things that happens often at poetry events is, you can get excited about things and you might want to clap about something. The common experience in poetry readings is that you will wait until the end of when the poet has read all of their poems for their segment, and then clap at that point. If as they are reading something, if you get, the spirit moves you, if you want to just kind of do a little soft little finger snap that's not really a snap, that'll say something to the poets. Or Alarie said sometimes she hears kind of murmurs just a little bit as people get excited about things. But if you would please then hold your applause until an individual poet is done with all of their poems. After the reading, both Alarie and Dwight have books of their poetry that they will have for sale down in the fellowship hall, where we will have the ice cream social, which we hope you will all come down and enjoy with us afterwards. In case anybody needs bathroom facilities during this time, if you go out that back door over there, there is a restroom just kind of on the other side of that window over there. There's a door. So if you need to leave, if you would go through the back door back there in order to do that, that would be great. And so I think then we are ready to start. I'm going to ask Dwight to start first. We do have complete bios, or fairly complete bios, on the back of your program for each of the readers. So I am the poets, so I'm not going to read those in full. I will just say again that he is from the suburban St. Louis town of Webster Groves, but grew up on a farm in central Kansas and attended Heston College. He is active in St. Louis poetry circles and currently serves on the board of St. Louis Poetry Center. He has published 2 poetry chapbooks and has had poems published in several journals. Dwight.
And thank you, Jan, for the introduction and for all of the organization for this event. First poem I'm going to read came from a poetry exercise at a workshop, and the theme was "I Am From," which is the title of this poem. I am from sky blue over flat land, township roads, square miles laid in grid. I am from the small white church, separate from the world by the cemetery. I am from grandma's kitchen, the knife, butchering chickens, the yeasty lump of bread dough. I am from the red barn, classic lines built by my grandfather, mud nests of barn swallows. I am from responsibilities begun at age 6, watering chickens, filling feed boxes, picking up fallen apples. I am from the open seats of old John Deeres, plowing stubble, mowing hay, cultivating maize. I am from the cherry trees, ripe with fruit in the high branches in June, sour then sweet. I am from wheat sowed in autumn, dull green in winter, oceans of harvest, golden in summer. I am from structure shaped by fundamentalism, rigidity, tempered by expectations, love, and home-baked pies. I am from the land, windblown, restless, gone now to a place not where I am from. First summer after Heston College, I spent a work-study summer in New York City and had one of the worst jobs of my life. I was a day camp leader for a bunch of 7-year-old boys, and 2 days a week we had group activities, but 3 days a week we were given subway passes and had to find activities. I had kept a journal, and so I still had the names, and a few years ago I wrote this poem. New York Lost Boys. Louis, John, Jose, James, and Ricky, and a pair of Anthonys. The boys were 7 that day camp summer, Upper West Side, 105th in Amsterdam, July 1971. Vernon, Danny, Ivan, Andrew, Oliver, Javier, and Sigfredo. Some days a dozen, some days only 4 or 5 to fight, explore, run away, swim, or swing from overhead handrails on the A train from the Staten Island Ferry back uptown after a passerby found the lost Anthony among the crowd. On our best afternoon, we climbed the bell tower of Riverside Church over the Hudson, bells chiming in surround sound as our troop descended. On a trip to Heckscher State Park Beach, Long Island, the uptight counselor covered himself with seaweed and played the role of a sea monster hero. There were days of lost swimsuits, fights and more fights. Once Vernon disappeared, walked home, backpacked still, wet from its mysterious travel across a lake in Central Park. One morning, that long, long summer, we rode an elevator to the top of a new tower still incomplete, but its observation deck open to the wind, open to views of distant bridges, to Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, the Statue of Liberty, and next door another tower beginning to rise from dirt and concrete. We took in the wind at unimagined heights, from where 30 years later on a September morning, desperate jumpers would leap from an inferno from which there would be no escape. These decades later, the man who was happy to leave those boys wonders about Louis, John, Jose, the pair of Anthonys, James and Ricky. Which among them became the firefighter? Which among them became the broker who walked home that day from Wall Street? Which among them was bereft of someone he loved? Which was far away in prison? Which was drugged and dimmed on some obscure Bronx street? Did Vernon, Danny, Ivan, Andrew, Oliver, Javier, or Sigfredo ever dream of sea monsters? Or hear the bells of Riverside Church, resonance descending, some bell still ringing, tonal lingering deep in the psyche of a man once 7 who leapt and flew and whose soul still lives on happily in the land of lost boys in New York City? A number of summers in my, summer of my 17, 18, 19, and helped them get started. The summer before I went to New York City, I worked on a custom harvest crew from North Texas to the Dakotas, and this poem was written not too many years ago, but it's back to an experience in 1971, and mostly we were harvesting wheat. This happens to be oats, but Oklahoma Zen, 1971. A small field of oats, verdant in late morning sun, wraps around a hillock, conical. Bushels of thin tan grains pour and fill the harvester's grain tank. The empty truck has not arrived. The diesel engine falls silent. I climb down the green ladder, walk to the edge of the field. The hill beckons. I climb. At the top, I sit at the center of 4 directions. Summer wind above the combine with its mound of grain almost spilling. Fields, a grove of trees, sky, an empty road. A small stone catches the sun, gray and round and smooth. I put it to my tongue. This is how a moment tastes. This is a short, recent poem, and since it's September, called September Sky Ride. All day, cloud fingers have crossed the sky, touching its lightness, feeling its temperature for seasons changing. All day, the wind has swept the willows, waved pine boughs at passing clouds, and the hawk's circled weave of air. The wind of this new season begs a body to let go, be swept, to ride cloud trails across the sky. When I fly, I always like a window seat. And there are a number of the poems in this book, View from the Third Eye, which are aerial views of something. This one's called Faith. I hate the gray pea soup when I can't see out the window and I strongly suspect there's a mistaken business jet approaching on a perpendicular path that I can't see, and neither can the pilot of this liner in which I ride over what may still be Chicago. Gray pea soup requires faith in the relative truth of instruments, and from me it requires faith in pilots and in air traffic controllers, all of whom I know must be as fallible as me. So, as the pea soup brightens toward a likely top of cloud arrival, even though it's not quite heaven, I have to believe in God or guardian angels or spirit guides, something, someone, some force that most of the time, well, all of the time so far, keeps me airborne, keeps me grounded. Several years ago, Passover and Good Friday were on the same day, and I do a lot of walking in my neighborhood, and as I was walking that Friday evening with the full moon rising, and noticed a meal going on in the window of a neighbor's house, and it became the beginning of this poem, Passover and Good Friday. Full circle of light rising out of dusk, the beginning of the Seder meal seen through a neighbor's window. The blood from the animal sacrificed for feasting, the blood that spared from that night of terror, an angel on a terrible mission to kill each firstborn except those in these homes marked with painted blood, passed over, these lives spared. But what of the others? The wailing mothers, bewildered sisters, brothers, the angry, helpless fathers. This full moon night circling forward in a mesh of Passover and Good Friday centuries later, a firstborn tortured on a cross, mocked, disdained, given, say his followers, as the sacrifice of blood commemorated in dark churches poised and waiting for the miracle of morning. This full moon rising beyond the limits of tradition, the stretch of belief, the possibility of the improbable, one constant passing over, one presence that lights the nights of the world. This next poem was published in a St. Louis anthology, anthology of St. Louis poets, and it's sort of a response to people responding to Black Lives Matter, or say all lives matter, and so this poem sort of addresses that. It's called Except Unless. All lives matter, except, of course, in war. All lives matter unless, of course, we think you might have broken a law. All lives matter except, of course, those we know matter more. All lives matter unless, of course, it's one of those. All lives matter, some just not quite so much. All lives matter unless, of course, it was self-defense. All lives matter except, of course, if they're stupid, dumb, or dense. All lives matter unless, of course, they live over there. All lives matter except the ones that we suppose are deviant, defiant, or non-compliant. All lives matter unless, of course, they look like they might riot. All lives matter if they're like us, the good, the lucky, the ones we understand. The rest don't matter quite so much. And my final poem is an old poem. It's a lot of it's a play on words, but it's also sort of an acknowledgement of maybe our responsibilities and where we've come from. It's called A Word Jazz History of the Western World. Let me take a sip of water before I do this one. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, sugar, tobacco, caffeine, sugar, tobacco, caffeine, building up a head of steam. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, sugar, tobacco, caffeine, sugar, tobacco, caffeine, engine of the machine. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cotton, cattle, corn. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cotton, corn, and wheat. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cotton, corn, and wheat. Lay the track, push them back. Lay that track, push them back. Lay that track, push them back. Shoot the bison, watch the engines run. Shoot the bison, watch the engines run. Isn't this fun? Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cotton, cattle, and corn. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cotton, cattle, and corn. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cotton, cattle, and corn. Cut the trees, burn it clean. Cut the trees, burn it clean. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cotton, cattle, and corn. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cotton, cattle, and corn. Plow the prairie, fence the field, turn the wild into yield. Plow the prairie, fence the field, turn the wild into yield. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cattle, corn, and wheat, cattle, corn, and wheat. Lay the track, pave the roads, build the cities, turn on the lights. Lay the track, pave the roads, build the cities, turn on the lights. See, it's our land now. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine, sugar, tobacco, caffeine, sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cattle, corn, and wheat, cattle, corn, and wheat, cattle, corn, and wheat. See, it's our land now. We are what we eat. We are who we beat to make this new land home to sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cotton, cattle, and wheat. We are the barons now of sugar, tobacco, caffeine, cattle, corn, and wheat. Shoot the bison, watch the engines run. Cotton, cattle, corn, and wheat. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine. Sugar, tobacco, caffeine.
Thank you, Dwight. Okay, next up, Alarie. I'll tell you just a little bit about Alarie, although there's more information about her on the back also. Alarie Tennille was born and raised in Portsmouth, Virginia, and was a pioneer co-ed at the University of Virginia, where along with a degree in English, I love this, she earned a black belt in feminism. Love it. She is active with the Writers' Place here in Kansas City, and her newest poetry collection, 3 a.m. at the Museum, will be featured this evening in her readings. Alarie.
Is this working okay now? I hope my reading will make you want to go visit the Nelson Atkins. So a lot of the artwork from them is going to be posted on the wall over here as I read. Some of the art isn't at that museum, but I think you'll still appreciate it. And I want to thank Jan and Lonnie Buerge. They are my next door neighbors, which is how I'm lucky enough to be here today. And Lonnie even went one better and said, I want you to read your ekphrastic poems. So it made it much easier to plan my reading today without looking through however many hundreds of poems I've written. The first piece of art is actually outdoors. You would see this if you walk through the statue garden before coming into the museum or when you leave. And it's called Standing Figures by Magdalena Abakanowicz, 1994 to 1998. You may notice that the figures do not have heads, and it looks like they're made out of mud, but of course they're made out of metal. Like-minded. Beware the one who raises a headless army, shapes sinew and bone from mud like some golem brigade. Danger, armed only with obedient parts, feet all pointing in the same direction. They wait for the one with lips to yell forward. Without the yellow warning light of conscience, they process only black and white, on or off. Motionless, they pose little threat, but crowd mentality quickly kindles in the thrill of crashing glass and cheering stadiums. Risk escalates when the ranks explode with others longing too much to belong. Now we're moving on to probably my favorite artist of all time, Claude Monet, or Claude Monet if you're actually French. And The Water Lilies is probably the most popular painting at the Nelson. There's maybe the second most popular is also going to be featured today, so we'll get to that. And when I was a child, I've already said, my family read a lot, but they had no interest at all in art. So I started researching it on my own and found the paintings in Monet and the World Book Encyclopedia, because it was the only art we had in the house. And I started asking for art books as gifts and checking them out from the library and doing research papers on Claude Monet. So this is a particular painting means a lot to me because we had been to Giverny. Monet's Water Lilies. The painting soaks up the wall. I sit just where I stood at Giverny. I already know this pond. Painting the light, said Monet. Canvas after canvas, painting never the clarity of water, but something just beyond, the swish of weeping willow, scent of summer, and how one's breath slows. Reflections. Among the splashes of blue and purple, I see gray faces, but can't tell if they're Monet's ghosts or my own. And now you're going to hear a couple more Monet poems. This next poem, a painting, does not live at the Nelson, but it did come for a nice long visit when there was an exhibit about how railroads changed the world and brought us into the modern era. And before the trains came, there was already an innovation that mattered to the Impressionist painters who wanted to paint outdoors, and that is that paints came in metal tubes already made. You didn't have to mash up minerals and mix them with emollients and stuff. So that and the railways let them step out of the city, maybe Paris they're living in, and they'd go out into the countryside just for the day to paint. So this is Claude Monet, Railway Bridge, Argenteuil, 1874. Monet saved the moment when time accelerated through the sleepy countryside. He painted out the train's screech and thunder, so like the coming of war. Froze the chuff as fluffy clouds, turned the intimidating bridge into a cow with sunlit legs, wading across the river. And the swan wing of the sailboat, that is us gliding by. Now, because I'm so fond of Monet, he is, I consider, my second father and the second leading man of my poetry, because my father is the first, and I don't want to embarrass my husband by writing so many poems about him. So Claude Monet pops up even when I'm not looking at a painting, which is what happened with this one, and I retrofit a painting to go with what I had written based on life. The painting is Spring at Giverny, 1886, by Claude Monet. Today, I feel like Monet, a tedious winter, like page after page of impressionist paintings printed in black and white. Finally, the cold steps away for a moment, but tries today to wipe spring from its canvas. I smile at the tiny flags of green waving victory. And like Monet, I think I'm the first to discover that every green is its own green, sometimes not green at all. Now we're going to move to another impressionist, Van Gogh, and this is not one of his most famous paintings, but I've already written to all of those, so what intrigued me about this was I was amused by the title in which someone felt they need to name everything that's in the picture. So it's Van Gogh, Road with men walking, carriage, cypress, star, and crescent moon. Vincent's night is never night. He drinks the darkness, tosses a burning tumbleweed into the sky, sets parched fields ablaze against the dark flame of a cypress, the road a silver stream. Vincent's quiet is never quiet. The moon cups an ear to hear the muffled French of men making their way home, the sound not eclipsed by the slow hooves of a horse, but by the screams that reach our eyes in every brushstroke. When I first started doing ekphrastic writing, I looked at the paintings that I loved the best, the Impressionist and 17th century Dutch painting, that kind of thing. But I soon discovered that the stranger the art was to me, sometimes I didn't even like it at all. If it was an abstract or surreal or something like that, I was going to come up with a lot more original writing. So this next one, I hope will demonstrate that. Reply to Red, 1943, by Yves Tanguy. Party for two. Dad wanted a going away party. We tried, but we do not eat, drink, dance, or get jokes. Party poopers, he said. We do not poop either. But we yelled clink and wished him safe travel in 50 languages. Every night we still toast Dad, our Android developer, even though he returned to Earth 183 days, 5 hours, 13 minutes, and 7 seconds ago. We continue to transmit data, but suspect our real mission was to keep Dad company. He named us Floozy and Monk. Probably another joke we do not get. Dad said if he had his laboratory here, Floozy would have red hair, and we both would have opposable thumbs. Human vanity. We lack nothing. At 1900 hours, we stop work. Clink, I tell Floozy. Welcome home, Monk, she says. Laughter's good too. The next one is, we're going to feature a sculpture. This is Bird in Flight, 1920s by Constantin Brancusi, and I want to prepare a little bit for why this was a big deal, that the artwork went to court. It seems that, I didn't know this, but when a museum buys an expensive work of art and imports it, It goes through customs, and if it were something other than art, it would be taxed heavily. And if it's art, it's considered the public's belonging. The art museum is going to show it to the public and even to visitors from other countries, that kind of thing. So this painting got hung up in customs. But is it art? In 1928, Brancusi's sculpture, Bird in Space, stood trial. U.S. Customs refused to call it art, taxed it as kitchenware. They looked too hard for feathers and claws. Gone are the wings, but not the flight. It swoops, sharp beak, flared tail, part missile, part dolphin, yet still so very bird, bronzed in sunlight. Brancusi captured what mattered, even your reflection. If you got up close to the photo, you would see that the photographer's reflected in the piece. Now we have my favorite painting in the museum, John the Baptist, 1604 by Caravaggio. Like the water lilies, it goes on tour too often, and I go in to see my favorite picture and it's not there. So, but I think you'll be surprised at what poem comes out from John the Baptist. Here they come. While humans are quarantined, penguins get their first tour of the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. Tiny tourists in tuxedos burst into the galleries. The paintings look down from their frames, silently chuckling. They miss visitors as much as these new friends of art, who gawk back at them with equal wonder. The zoo guests proved to be discerning critics. Water lilies, not part of their habitat. But John the Baptist, him they can relate to. Caravaggio captures the fatigue of a tired dad trying to keep up with toddlers. Drooping in the heat, he sits slumped, splayed legs, happy to stay right there, watching them for hours. Lonnie Buerge came to a recent reading that I gave and told me he liked this particular poem, so I put it in the lineup. So thanks, Lonnie. This is a Cubist painting, The Pianist, 1919, by Maria Blanchard. The real me. My daughter wants her money back, but it doesn't look like you. The artist understands me in ways a daughter never can. No need to pose, said Blanchard. Just be yourself. Get lost in your music. Thank God, no sitting stiffly, annoying the artist with every twitch, shift, complaint about an aching back. I can control my open mouth wonder when I play, but I still feel it. I vibrate, slip into another dimension, lose all sense of time. I'm going to end with my most famous poem, if a poem can be very famous. This has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize twice, and it won the Poem of the Month on Goodreads many years ago. I don't remember, I think it was 2015. My husband and I went to Atlanta to the High Museum of Art there, and we saw the quilts from Gee's Bend on display, room after room after room of these huge quilts, so refreshingly different from your standard quilts. And they had videotapes of the women who made them talking about their experiences and singing gospel, and it was just all around wonderful. And about a year after that, I found out I had the opportunity to watch PBS special about the quilts from Gee's Bend, and I said, okay, here's my chance. I can go and take lots of notes and have all the facts together to write this poem. So this is probably my best poem because it took me 18 months, and we'd be in a sad state if all poems took 18 months. The Quilters of Gee's Bend. Seems like that old river tied itself in a knot just to keep black folks there at G's Bend, while time and fortune swept on by. And Master Petway gave those folks his name, but stripped everything else he could. Left just scraps, but they were used to that. So those hands that hardly needed something else to do unraveled their worn-out world, pieced together remnants of Africa and raggedy dreams to make something new. Let dress tails dance with breeches, heat from the cotton fields pressed deep in their seams. So tired of plowed furrows, they let their stitches bend now and then, just like that river. Nothing perfect, yet God was in the details. And the quilters called that making do and visiting and keeping warm and pulling up memories each night, till one day they were told, we call that art. Thank you.
Thank you, Alarie. Okay, and then Lonnie's our third reader for the evening. Some of you know him quite well, but I'll read just a little bit, especially for the people who are watching online. Lonnie Buerge began writing more intentionally over the past 10 years and considers himself to be a young poet. In addition to poetry, he has written a number of liturgical pieces for services here at Rainbow. He enjoys spending time in the Flint Hills at the Tall Grass Prairie Preserve. Lonnie.
I will be reading a cross-section of my writings over the past few years. I am part of an online poetry workshop. Several of the poems tonight will come from those workshops as responses to prompts. This is one of them when one day the prompt was, "It's all in the river." It's not as if one part can separate and be left behind, for then it is a lake, something quite different from a river that flows on and on as one moving, rolling being full of creatures struggling to stay alive, trees having let go and given in, soil of 1,000 fields tumbling over and over, partly cleansing, partly destroying, partly beautiful, partly ugly or awful, starting off clear and refreshing, getting more and more muddy as the miles and days pass, and yet it moves with honest intention. And I think it is not unlike living, picking up the good and the not so good, but always drawn towards the sea. I will say the prompt on this poem came from Jan Buerge, who insisted that I quit complaining and go in and write a poem. The old fence remains. The old fence around the rear garden isn't giving up easily. Although it can stand straight, it is mostly soft and the edges are frayed like an old shirt. It has its sags and holes, even entire pieces cut away. The hinges don't work like they used to. The gates don't open without effort, and they must be closed with care. A lock would be pointless. But it's become a bit of a friend as I poke and prod, nail and prop up its weaknesses, because it has stood there these many years guarding pets and children and letting there be a place of quiet and beauty, a place the world passes by. It has willed itself to live on while dying one step at a time, and to receiving all the help I can give it. The next poem is longer than I generally write. It is a bit of a story poem. It is about my experience as a voluntary service worker in 1970 in central St. Louis. It is about a mundane thing like a chauffeur's license, the precursor to the CDL today, and I happened to have one in those years. I had the license to drive. I got it so I could drive grain trucks into Kansas City from our little town south down 71 Highway. I was 20 and eager, had a big hat and cockroach killers, could cuss just a little, humor the streetwalkers, sleep on top of the load, out of their way. I knew how to walk and talk in my town, in my truck, on my streets, but there I was in St. Louis, right in the shadow of the Pruitt-Igoe Towers, warehouses for black folks built by white folks who did not understand or care to. There I was trying to make sense out of a country that no longer made any to me. John and Martin and Robert were all gone, and so were Cheney and Schwimmer and Goodman. There I was, trying to dip those pointed boots into waters I knew nothing of. I did have the license to drive. So I was not so much asked as appointed. White college boy, we need you to drive the bus. You have the license. We are going to Cairo. And being naive, but not ignorant, I agreed to drive the bus to Cairo. In some places, this would be Cairo, but in Illinois, it is Cairo, kind of like the syrup, all sticky and sweet, too much of it, and, well, you know, just works that way. There, amidst the hot and the humid, the decay, and the feet, I had the license to drive. Little rickety old bus, painted bright yellow like we shouldn't be seen otherwise. Black and white folks weren't always noticed riding the bus together in 1970. There was no mistaking our mission, no confusion about where we were going, riding the little yellow bus 2 hours, 38 minutes to Cairo, Little Egypt. Tapes playing in our heads. People in Cairo don't care who you are. If you don't fit in, you might not get out. Little yellow bus to Cairo. It was the hot summertime, and the only AC was the holes in the floorboard that drew the wind through the windows, the same open windows that might let the cocktails through once we made it to Cairo. Cocktails all lit up just for us. We knew the stories of other buses in other places. Little yellow bus to Cairo. I had the license to drive. We arrived in that tiny place between two big rivers, just waiting for us to fall in. Accidents happened in Cairo. We stepped off that bus as if there was hope, and we marched down that sad and forlorn Main Street. Little old white country boy, scared as the day was hot. But I marched behind folks that might have been scared, but were no longer willing to wait. Their tapes no longer played. We marched through the deathly, stinking quiet and saw folks that might have wanted out, but who wanted us out even more. We marched from one end and back, hardly a sound, just the beat, the beating of the drum of the Black Panthers leading us. I marched as if I knew what I was doing and where we were going, like the Panthers would lead us across to the promised land, if only we walked on, if only we believed. And when it was over, we got back on our little yellow bus, and the little yellow bus took us home. I had the license to drive it. And now to a different sort of bus. Last year, I worked at Habitat for Humanity, and lacking a vehicle for a period of time, I had the opportunity to ride the KC Metro buses. I enjoyed it in general, but it required a change in my rhythms of life. Bus route, Main Max 1. I step on at Warnell and 67th Terrace. The bus rushes between stops this early workday, beginning its morning rhythm. 63rd and Brookside, and then slows down to let the schedule catch up. 59th and Brookside, 57th and Brookside, 55th and Brookside. Got a bike? No problem, put it on the rack, we'll wait. UMKC, Brookside and 51st, wheelchair. You're welcome here. The bus kneels, extending a ramp of access. The driver gets up, secures the chair. No one complains. We've got the time. No hurry about it. Move on back, people. Make room. Everyone wants to get on board. Plaza, 47th and J.C. Nichols. The shift. The bus is crowded today. It's hot and noisy. The scene shifts at each stop. People get on, people get off. Each person uninvited, one more than another. Strangers packed in close, confined for a few blocks, moving in a common direction. The office workers, the dock hands, the homeless, the students, the parents, all of us jostling our work bags or all our worldly possessions. It's just too much today. My stop can't come soon enough. But then the magic happens. That father 3 rows up, standing while his children sit, and he works determined to comb the little girl's hair, struggling to get all the ribbons just right, finally getting some help from another rider, working hard as the bus jostles us all, and then it's done. She's ready. He's proud. Hell, we're all proud. They step off together. All of us watch them, headed to school, holding hands. Where else? Where else? One morning, I left the Cleaver YMCA and headed to my office on the Truce Max bus. It was starting to rain, and I was worried about getting to the office wringing wet. The bus stop at Troost and Gregory is like most. It's just a bench, nothing more. So I was glad to see the bus coming. This is the story of that ride. Traveling up Troost Avenue. The bus comes to a wheezing stop. Doors burst open with a flourish. The driver is singing. The bus driver is singing us up Troost Avenue this rainy morning. The wipers with their brush and brush and brush beat, providing a background rhythm as the congregation gets seated, jostling for their favorite pew. Come on, get on board. This bus is leaving, no time to wait. Got to get on board. The pavement is shimmering like a pathway to heaven. The bus rocks to and fro. The passengers sway together like the Holy Ghost has gotten on board this bus. Got to be ready. This bus don't wait. Come on in, get on board. The bus is leaving. Glory, glory, hallelujah. The bus is filling up. We are all accidentally joining this rolling congregation of the Metro bus, this magic bus to the promised land, this red chariot of fire, until she stops singing. And it's very quiet. Then from the very back of the bus comes a deep, deep voice. Driver, we're going to need you to keep on singing. Glory, glory, get on board. This is the bus, but it don't wait. I think I'll skip my stop. I'm going riding on to the promised land. By the way, that was true. That did actually happen. So, I spend a good amount of time wandering around the Flint Hills, and specifically the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve near Strong City. I'm an urban dweller, but I'm a prairie pilgrim. So how far did you walk? You may ask how far I walked, and I will say it was to the edge of tomorrow, out the back door of yesterday, to where the coyote howled in the evening light. Birds I could not name cooed in their nests. I walked past ancient beasts far bigger, more powerful than me, but allowing my passage as long as I gave more respect than attention. I walked to where the moon could shine so bright that I became a moon shadow, a specter brushing ever so lightly over the ground. I walked on and on into the darkness to where the silence was deafening and roared in my ears, drowning out noisy chatter, past and future, leaving only my shuffling footsteps on the consecrated ground. I walked to where the Milky Way opened up across the dark canopy of stars, and on, to where the grasses grow deep into the soil, to where few have tread. More beating heart than modern mind, I walked to where I became small. My last three poems are somewhat aspirational for me. Writing has given me license to be aspiring without denying my shortcomings and failures. I hope these might strike a chord for you. So, let us seek a composting life, one willing to celebrate decay, a harbinger path to something new yet unknown and unseen, turning over the remains of yesterday, the dead leaves of last year's beauty, the leftovers, the spoiled efforts, the overripe desires, the shells of hollow success, the husks of good intentions, the stems and hopes, buds of failures, turning it all over with this year's errant growth spurts and wilting blossoms, letting the air in, allowing the rains of today to break apart the past, letting it rot back to its base elements, that through the mixing and melting, there will be energy released, the cycle restarted. The chrysalis. A chrysalis does not care what type of caterpillar has created it, only existing for the process of transformation, it being the vehicle, the space, the time, a way to transition from a crawl to winged flight. And without such a time, there would be no butterflies and too many caterpillars. So the shelter becomes the most critical part. Safety from wind, rain, light, prying eyes. But the chrysalis is the least enjoyed, the most unknown, mysterious. For the caterpillar is valued for what it will become, and the butterfly for what it is. But were it not for the chrysalis? For my last poem, I'd like to read something about the autumn. The autumn cometh. I might have wished that the summer of my life had lasted longer, contented to let go of the early spring, much too chaotic to want to return.
but aware that the summer was the time to grow and flower and put down deep roots. But now that the hot summer days are beginning to fade to autumn, I rush to be sure that I am ready for winter, that the sap in my veins was not wasted on trivial triumphs and dead-end dalliances. There is a kind of joy that creeps in, knowing that the seasons are changing without waiting on me to catch up or understand. They just keep moving, and I am swept along. There is a kind of joy that I come to the fall with a desire to see the colors, feel the breezes, pause in the shadows of those around me, and to hug whatever trunk or limb they are willing to share. There is a kind of joy to look into the autumn and know robins will certainly return. The cardinal will make new nests. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lonnie, and thank you, Dwight, and thank you, Alarie, again. Thank you all for attending, and now we encourage you to go downstairs where the ice cream will be. Both Dwight and Alarie will have books for sale, and Lonnie will also be down there, so welcome dialogue about the poems that they read tonight. And if you enjoyed the performance tonight, the Rainbow Performing Arts Committee, which is part of our congregation here at our church, loves hosting different kinds of events. And if you enjoyed this evening, there will be a donation basket downstairs if you want to drop something in it that helps kind of support our continuing to have different performances. At the bottom of your program, there is a listing of 2 more programs that will be coming up in the next couple of months. So thank you again for coming, and we invite you to go downstairs. Thank you.